There are some very strange characters in the book of Isaiah chapter 6 that might not be what you think they are. Or maybe they are. Depends what you think they are. These characters are the so-called seraphim or seraphs. What is a seraph exactly? Well, let's back it up just a little bit and let's read some of this chapter. This is my own ragged translation from Hebrew here. In the year King Uzziah died, King Uzziah being a very powerful king in ancient Judah who reigned for something like 4 decades. I mean, if you reign for 40 years as a king in a context like this, you have a true grasp on power, you have a country that's stable, you're doing very well. So the death of a king marks a major transition then, not just in normal times, but especially after a time of long, presumably a long time of wealth and stability. In that year, when King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord, Adonai in Hebrew here, seated upon a throne, high and lifted up, and the hem or the bottom part of his robe, just that little bottom part of the robe alone, filled the temple. So in other words, this deity is huge, and the vision he's seeing is of a giant deity who's just the very bottom of his robe is filling the entire temple space, meaning that the deity must be much larger than that. Seraphim were standing above him, 6 wings to each. With 2 he flew. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet. Regel in Hebrew. Feet here might be a euphemism for genitals, as it sometimes is. Could mean feet, could mean genitals. And with 2 he flew, so 6 wings. And he called this to this, each one called to each one, saying, Holy, 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 Kadosh, 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 Adonai Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. All the earth is full of his kavod, his glory. Okay, what a scene that is, right? And the scene goes on to narrate the temple shaking and smoke filling the house. And Isaiah says, woe is me. I'm totally undone. I don't know what to do because I have unclean lips and I live in the midst of an unclean people. And here I am seeing, the Lord of hosts. And one of these seraphim flies. This is in verse 6. Flies to him with a live coal carried by tongs from the altar and touches it to Isaiah's lips. Who are these seraphim? Is this the only place that a seraph is mentioned in the Bible? Actually, no. These seraphim, but they're not mentioned often. These seraphim are only mentioned 7 times in the Bible, only in the Torah and only in Isaiah. They're mentioned twice in Numbers chapter 21. I'll put all these references down below in the description. Only twice in the book of Numbers to describe ancient Israel in the wilderness encountering these poisonous, biting snakes. So the seraph is a snake that has some kind of fiery or poisonous effect. 1 time in Deuteronomy describing something similar, and then 4 times in Isaiah. So Isaiah really seems to like this word, particularly scattered throughout the first 30 chapters of the book. And in fact, 2 of the times in Isaiah when they're mentioned, not in this passage, but you also see flying here noticed in this passage. They're called Seraph Meofef, flying seraphs or flying snakes. What the heck is a flying snake? It might be that a reader of this passage, when imagining this kind of visionary throne room of God, you might think of a kind of like a cherubim or like an angel, like a cute winged figure, maybe like some kind of baby-like figure. But the iconographic register that an ancient Israelite would have had in the Iron Age, around the time that we can imagine something like this happening in the 8th century, in the 700s BCE, might have had a very different image in her or his mind. And we can actually look to archaeological findings, to ancient iconography, to understand what that imagery might have been. And maybe who knows, maybe it's a little surprising. Let me show you some examples of what this imagery might have looked like. So from some Egyptian iconography, this is not high-class, high-tech YouTubing here, I do realize. But here, this is a painted wooden coffin from Egypt from the 7th century, maybe from the 6th century BCE. It's from Egypt. You can see one of these winged serpent characters here. Do you see the snake with the wings kind of flying around and doing his thing? Notice also on the throne of Tutankhamun, the Egyptian king, the famous King Tut. Notice on the edge of the chair, you have a kind of a snake head there with these wings kind of coming out as part of the arms. So we find this imagery a lot in Egyptian style iconography, basically in a very particular role, and which is associated with the king. And it is kind of like some kind of armed bodyguard for the king. There at the throne or there in some kind of royal context to protect the king. The idea is the king never just rolls alone, right? He has an entourage of various kinds of guardians, both real and also mythical. I like these examples too. They're a little simpler, but these seal impressions here that I'll show you were all found within the boundaries of the kingdom of Judah, and really from a similar time period to when this chapter in Isaiah might have been written. Here you can see more images of this kind of like winged snake character. I know you can see the words through there. This is from one of my favorite books, Kale and Uhlinger's Gods, Goddesses, and Images of God. I'll put a link to that book down in the notes. If you're interested in ancient iconography, this is like the book, one of the books to get. But you can see the idea here of the multi-winged snake character. Now, perhaps it's not so surprising that we would have flying snakes. Perhaps it is, but there's a little bit of a twist here, and I'll end with this. The twist here in this passage is that these flying seraphs, these flying snake figures, are not, they're in a position where you'd think they are the Lord's bodyguards. They're guarding him in this heavenly throne room of sorts. But actually not. Actually, what they're doing as they fly is they are covering their face and covering their vital organs from the power and radiance of God. So in other words, they're not protecting God, they're protecting themselves against God. So we see a little bit of a twist here on this imagery in this absolutely extraordinary passage where Isaiah is taken into a visionary experience in the temple. Isaiah in chapter 1 of the book is very hard on the temple. He's very hard on the idea of sacrifices, all the things associated with the temple. He says, oh, don't think that these things can save you. Don't think that God wants these things. And one could get the impression from Isaiah chapter 1 and that harsh imagery about sacrifice that he's really not a fan of the temple apparatus at all. But I do think it's important to notice in this text that the imagery he sees is in fact imagery of the temple. The tongs that the seraph takes to take the coal from the altar. This is all cultic ritual implementation of the temple itself, of the priesthood. So it's not so easy to necessarily distance Isaiah from the priesthood, even though he seems very critical of that sort of thing. Apparently God's got a pretty wild entourage when he appears to the prophet.